Hey everybody, my name's Chris. I'm a bookaholic. It's great to be here with two fine folk. These are accomplished authors, booksellers, amazing men who have a great passion for literature, all things books. You could easily say bibliophiles. And so here we are, and we're just going to have fun. We're going to talk about what we love and uh, welcome. So thanks so much, Gary and Patrick, for being a part of this incredible opportunity for me, especially.
I'm
Sure.
really pleased to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Well, okay, so a lot of people who know you, this is going to be easy peasy, no real need for hardcore introductions, but many of you don't. So Gary Goodman, well versed in the world of books, wrote a incredible book called The Last Bookseller, which I am loving and have loved. I'm listening now to the audio version of it just so I can enjoy the sweet sentences once again. And I've already turned some folks on to this. I have a lot of family that's in the good grief in the St. Paul, Minneapolis area. So they've gotten their hands on the book as well. We want to see if we can get a little bit more folks reading it. This is such a wonderful just brief on the whole world of bookselling, where we've come from to really where we are today. And this scratched all the right itches. So Gary Goodman is the author not only of this, but I know he's writing some other works, which we'll talk about a little later in the interview. And Patrick spent a lot of time being I don't know, scarred for life or introduced to the world of books by working at the bookstore there in Stillwater. And he himself is an accomplished author, numerous books. I have a number of them. I'll show those as well a little later. And he also is teaching at Augustana. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yep, that's right.
In Sioux Falls, which is near and dear to my heart, South Dakota. So we got a lot to talk about. So once again, welcome, and I'm hoping that we'll just kind of open a can here of literary goodness.
Love it. A
All right.
feast.
All right, so Gary, let me just start. I look, obviously I've got the camera that I don't know how to use here. But this book, The Last Bookseller, A Life in the Rare Book Trade, I don't know how I found this, but I ended up looking at, some place for books about books. That's my deal. I got a problem, and it's books about books. And I found this book, and I snagged it, and I started reading it. And I remember thinking to myself, because initially you let us know you're right there in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's kind of where I grew up as a kid. In my mind, I was thinking, I wonder if he's going to mention Harold's Bookstore, because nobody has ever referenced Harold's Bookstore. And I kind of felt like, as I was talking to Patrick earlier, that maybe I was imagining Harold's, because there's no pictures. Nobody's really referenced him, but I used to go to that store all the time. And the next thing you know, you mention Harold's Bookstore, and I'm thinking, this is insane. Then you start telling stories about Harold's Bookstore, and I'm thinking, this is incredible. And as I'm diving into your work, I just loved it. So let's start with that. What was kind of the meaning behind the madness? You decided long ago to walk into, you said, a used bookstore for the very first time, which kind of blew my mind. You'd never been
Yep.
into a used bookstore before.
No, I'd never been in a used bookstore before. I was working as a psychiatric counselor on a unit that treated violent and mentally ill adolescents. And the thing that sort of set me off was one night I was working the night shift, and a couple of the the patrons decided that they wanted to break out, and so they had a plot to kill the night staff, among them me. And so I decided that working with people that wanted to kill me was not necessarily the best long-term profession. And so shortly after that, I walked into this bookstore, and the guy who owned it wanted to sell it. And so I just out of curiosity, I asked him, well, if you sold the store, how much would you want for it? And he went through, first of all, he said 25,000, and um, I didn't have a dime to my name at the time. And so I just sort of ignored that. And then he said, well, I'd have to move the books and uh, pay extra rent. So how about 10,000? And uh, I didn't have $10,000 either. So um, I ignored that too. And then he finally got himself, he was kind of negotiating with himself, and he got himself down to $2,000. And then he said on a contract for deed at $100 a month. And that's basically how I got into the used book business.
Right. And
That
then
was in about that was in about 1982.
so you're in a difficult part of town, we could say.
Yes. Yeah, it was. You couldn't. I don't know. For people who know Minneapolis and St. Paul, you could not have picked a worse location than Arcade in Maryland is where the store was, and it was just a small hole in the wall place, and the books he had were he basically what he would do is he would go to um, uh, garage sales and book sales, and he'd basically collect the leftovers. So the books that I bought from him were the worst possible uh, stock you could imagine, and so I really had a trial by fire by the way that I got into the way that I got into the book business. That's for sure.
It was kind of, comedic as you're writing about that time period and you had someone come in to assess your books and he gives you that line like I've never seen a worse collection of books.
Yeah, yeah. He was a prominent book dealer, and I kind of convinced him to come over and look at the books, and it took him a matter of minutes to just turn to me and say, "This is the worst, most picked over stock of books I've ever seen in my life." That's right.
So I was a little worried about your sanity too because you were working still your job, that night hour, if I recall, and then
Yeah.
you'd go right into the book selling till around 5 o'clock. I'm thinking, when do you sleep and when do you see your family? I mean, obviously.
Yeah, and I had at the time I had four kids, and so and yeah, I'd go to work at about 11 at night. I'd work until maybe 7 in the morning, and then I'd go home and sleep for a while, and then I'd go to the store, and yeah, it was insane, is what it was. If if someone told me today that they were going to do something like that, I'd say they were crazy. But I
Well,
just
yeah.
I just really got hooked on the book business and the book part of it, and I saw all these other people who were doing reasonably well, and I thought they can't be any smarter than I am, and so I
Mm.
stuck with it and it took me quite a while to sort it out, but.
So would you say that you were a book person when you were younger or growing up, that you read a lot of books? I mean,
I would say I read a lot of books. I wasn't a book person in the sense that I would collect books or um, that type of book person. I read, but I wasn't a collector or someone who really appreciated the physical book at the time. No, no, I wasn't.
it's interesting because you tell some stories about your run-ins with some of these book criminals. They have kind of become a little bit known. There's been some Netflix specials that have highlighted some of these folks, and you said you had that encounter with Stephen Bloomberg, the book bandit,
Yep.
notorious for stealing. What is it? 23,600 books. I think you referenced
Right,
$20
right.
million worth. I mean, that's And, and your comment in this thing is hilarious. Of you're running with him, and he asks you a question.
Right. Well, yeah, he was probably the most prolific book thief in U.S. history, and he was a bit crazy himself in that he would hide in the Harvard Library and uh, steal their books. And he broke into Harold's. Well, he didn't actually break in. His tactic was to find a way in and then hide in the basement or in some secret place in these. And after the staff would go home, he would then he'd steal the books that he wanted. And he actually uh, stole books from Harold's twice in the course of his career. But he came into the Arcade Street bookstore when uh, I barely had any books, and he would look around. And one day I asked him if I could help him, and he asked me if I had any rare books, and or if he asked me if I had a rare book room, and I said I don't have a rare book room, and I said I'm not even sure I have any rare books. And with that, he left and never came back. So, and then I say in the book that I was a little insulted that he didn't even bother looking around to see if I had any books worth stealing.
That was such a great line. That was
Yeah,
hilarious. Yeah.
right,
I mean, I think that you probably dodged a bullet, let's just say,
right,
obviously.
right,
So I mean, a lot progresses. We're going to kind of come back and, but you tell a story. I think this was a boys' Catholic school in the Twin Cities area, and you stumble in there, and there's these books that have not been, kind of pillaged by the local book scouts. And this case is filled with all of these books, first editions,
right,
signed.
right,
My wife and I, we were re-listening to that part yesterday, and I said, I feel a sense of just loss and sadness when I hear this
right, right,
story. But
right.
tell people a little bit about that, because this is what every book collector is longing for, that kind of moment.
Well, right, and this was kind of the early in my career when I was sort of beating around trying to find books to buy and sell. And I walked into this sort of charity sale put on by a boys' prep school, Catholic prep school. And I walked in, and here was this whole case of um, beautifully, everyone had a dust jacket in a box, and they were all signed. And I didn't know enough I thought, well, and they wanted like $2 or $3 a piece for them. And at that time, my going rate to buy a book was about 50 cents. And so I looked around a little and I bought a couple of books. And then later I found out that these were, someone had donated an entire collection of books from the first edition Circle, which were limited to 150 copies and all signed by the authors. So there were, Kurt Vonnegut's and John Updike's and all the sort of more modern authors, but still, they sell for quite a bit. The Vonnegut's especially would go for a lot of money.
Yeah,
But so like I say in the book, I went back the next day, and of course they were all gone. So
just brutal.
I missed an opportunity there.
That's almost as bad as we used to have this delivery guy for medical supply company I was working at, and they would use the same numbers every single week for the lottery. And one week they changed it up, and then the numbers that were picked that week were the ones that they did.
Yeah, yeah, that's
That's
that's the way it
almost the
goes,
same.
that's for sure. Yeah,
So Patrick, obviously you stumble into Gary's presence there when he's in Stillwater. Am I getting that right? But
Yeah.
You were a part of the editing process for the last Bookseller, if I'm understanding this correctly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd say editing, but Gary gave me an early draft, and I offered some thoughts, which I was really delighted to do because the first time I met Gary was maybe 1990. I was in college, and I came home to my hometown of Stillwater. I needed a job, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, okay, what? And I'm an aspiring writer. I'm an English major, and I saw Gary's bookstore, and I thought that looks kind of perfect for me. I can learn more about the canon and the craft, and I knew very little about rare books, and I thought that seems like a really interesting thing to do. So I went into Gary's shop, and it was still so new that he was building like the wooden cases for the books to go into. And I asked if there was an opening, and Gary kind of hung his head. He's like, sorry, I don't need any help. And we got to talking a little bit, and I said, okay, well, I'm just home from college, and I was almost out the door when Gary said, "Where are you going to college?" And I said, "St. John's University," which is where Gary went to. So we talked about St. John's, which is a beautiful campus, and I've written about St. John's in my forthcoming book. And we finished talking, and I kind of thought that was it. And Gary said, "Why don't you come by tomorrow? I'll find something for you."
Mm.
And I was kind of I was a bother to him for many years after that. So I think I helped build some of the bookcases and painted the back room
Yep.
and all that kind of stuff. So and Gary and I have stayed in touch long after I've moved on to get my PhD and all that kind of stuff. So when he reached out with the manuscript, I thought, wow, this sounds really interesting, and I mean, I kind of fell in love with it right away. It's
Mm.
such a readable, informative
Oh,
book
yeah.
with a wry sense of humor that I just it's fun. It's a fun book to read.
Did you know
Well,
he
I
was that
have
funny, Patrick?
I
Sorry.
have to say that if Pat hadn't been so positive about the book, I don't know if I would have,
Mm.
if I would have kept at it. And that was really, I think that, when you're writing something, that's really important to have some some encouragement, because it's such a brutal business in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Mm.
You're basically working by yourself. You really don't have any, the only feedback you get is your own uh, torturous uh, ideas. And so it's really important to have someone that's kind of on your side. And I really appreciate that part of it from Pat.
Mm.
It's an odd thing being a writer because it's such a solitary, almost monastic existence. It's so introverted. And then when the book comes out, you're shoved onto a stage and suddenly you have to be an entertaining extrovert. And
Right.
it takes a certain
Yeah, yeah,
personality to be able to do that well.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It is. It is.
I mean,
And
if
and
you,
a lot of people don't do it that well, and I think I'm one of them. But it's it is a different kind of profession, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of interesting. You spent your whole life collecting and selling books, and then you're like, I'm going to become one of those guys. I'm going to write a book.
Right, right. Yeah.
Did anybody say to you, "What are you doing? Like, this is crazy"?
Well, I think that kind of thinking is more sort of, that's what you tell yourself
Mm-hmm.
more than, you know, and of course you'll show your stuff to I have 6 kids, and I'll show it to them, and they think it's, brilliant, and your friends. But Pat was the first semi-objective opinion I got. And then I submitted it to the University of Minnesota Press, and they were pretty enthusiastic about it right away. So that was
Yeah.
uh, kind of amazing, in a lot of ways. So
Well, it looks great. They did such a good job with packaging that. And
they did, right?
Gary, I don't know if I told you this, but I told my father about this book, and so he decided he was going to go down to the local used bookstore there, and he picked it up. Okay.
Yeah.
And he started reading it. And I've had a problem with books my entire life, and like I can't have enough is where I'm at. I'm probably going to become one of these people spoken about in your book that has a barn, and I'm like going to die with, the
Right,
collection all
right.
around me. But so he sends me a note the other day, and he goes, "I don't know why you're thinking you might want to, become a bookseller, because look, every biography and story that we're reading about bookstores, they all think it's catastrophic, and you need to get out of the, business." But um,
Yep.
and then he's like, "Oh, and by the way, I didn't realize it, but this is a signed, like first edition of Gary's book." And I thought, like, of course, just
The
leave it to
unsigned ones are really hard to find.
me.
Those are the
Those are
ones you
worth more
got. Those are
money.
the ones that are worth money.
That's hilarious, actually.
Right.
Yeah, good. Well, then I'm going to retire on this. I'm planning on it, Gary,
Sure.
that book. Um, so obviously you moved from the Twin Cities area so was it a leap right from the, kind of the lower uh difficult part of St. Paul, Minneapolis into Stillwater? Was it, or was there an interim bookstore between that?
No, it was that I went from the store on Arcade Street to the store in Stillwater. Uh, and in between that was about 8 years between 1982 and 1990. And I had virtually no walk-in traffic in East St. Paul. So I was basically doing most of my business through the mail when I
Yeah.
was, by the time, by 1990. And then one day, a guy came in and said he wanted to buy my store. And so uh, I kind of tried to talk him out of it, but it was, he was retired and he was determined to get into the book
Hmm.
business, and so and then at the same time, the Stillwater opportunity came up with a couple of other sort of well-established booksellers, and so we became partners and started St. Croix Antiquarian Books, and that's where Pat came in. And
I think
uh,
I have a memory of you telling me that I was the first employee you had that wasn't a relation of yours.
yes, you were. Yes, you were. And uh, I remember, and the people I hired, like Pat, I just would hire them based on they would come in and I'd start talking to them, and I eventually had quite a few employees, and it always seemed to work out pretty well. That just finding people that really liked books and were interested in the business and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I really enjoyed learning about rare books and what makes a book rare. And the fact that it's old doesn't mean that it's valuable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
That
yeah,
is,
that's a common misconception, that's for
yeah.
sure.
yeah, I'm seeing that a lot right now, especially on social media platforms like, whatever, Facebook Marketplace and eBay. There's this weird kind of idea that just because it's an older book, it's valuable. And
Yeah,
just some amazing junk is being sold for ridiculous prices. So,
yeah, yeah. That's right. That's
I mean,
right.
at the end of the day, if they're going to get that price for it, then good for them. But I'm not sure it's something I'd want in my collection. But
Yeah.
uh,
Well, the
go
people
ahead.
that do well at it are, they're really specialized. They know what they're doing, and people who make a living buying and selling books these days, and there aren't really that many. Um, really have to be sharp and really have to know the market, know what sells and stuff like that. So
So, Stillwater, let's talk about that. My So I don't know how I ended up in Stillwater, but I stumbled upon Loom's Theological Bookstore in that old
yeah,
church.
yeah,
And obviously, so Tom Loom, if I remember this right, he had that store rolling before you guys combined, and was he part of the St. Croix Antiquarian Bookstore as well?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, there was I mean, it's an interesting story in itself in that Tom Loom and Jim Cummings were Jim Cummings was is quite a character, and he actually bought that church simply because it came up for sale. And then he sold the church to Tom when Tom decided to go. Tom had a PhD in theology, and he studied in Germany and that kind of thing. And but he decided that he wanted to go into the secondhand book business. And so Jim, my other partner, so I was partners with Tom Loom and Jim Cummings, sold him the church.
Huh.
And those two guys were they were like oil and water in a lot of ways, and I wound up being in the middle of uh, a lot of that stuff. So
A lot of arguments, huh?
we yeah
We won't. Yeah, we
won't go
won't.
into any detail about that.
I worked for Tom. I had hours with you, of course, Gary, but
Yep.
I did work for Tom one summer at the church you're talking about, Chris.
Hmm.
And I remember the first day I walked in and he said, "I've got a job for you, Patrick. This is Tom." I'm like, "Okay." So, and it's a beautiful church, right? And he points to
Yep.
the choir loft and it's just
Oh,
books. And he points and he said, "We made a mistake. You see how it goes from Z to A? I want you to fix it so it goes from A to Z."
Oh
And I had to
no.
move about 15,000 books. It
oh
took me
yeah.
most of the summer. And
I'll get
it's
right
not
on
that
that.
you can just pick up like
Tom was an amazing
Oh my gosh.
businessman. He had like I say in the book, where most booksellers would buy 100 books, he'd buy 50,000. He would buy up these seminaries and places that were going out of business, and
Hmm.
so he had just a beehive of people working for him and moving these books
yeah,
and kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah, it was an operation.
That
Yeah, it
place.
was an operation.
Yeah.
He had himself like 250,000 books in different places. He had storage lockers and
It's
uh
hard for me to imagine a larger theological bookstore in all of North America.
no, that's exactly right. And then he would put together libraries for other seminaries or
Hmm.
other theological institutions. But he was so unique in that way in his abilities because he knew so much about theological books that like many businesses like that, once the kind of the principal leaves, the the people who take it over just can't replicate what that person can do. So yeah, it was an amazing operation he had going.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I kind of during that time in the late 80s, early 90s, my academic training started to take a turn towards theological exploration, and I found some books in that place that are almost impossible to find. And I paid more money at that place for books than I would have ever paid. But, it's kind of one of those once in a lifetime scenarios. And I
Mhm.
think in a lot of ways I think that's what we're missing in this day and age is that stumbling upon and finding the gem. And I also know, and I know that many used bookstore people have articulated this, but it's that finding a book that you never would have bought going to a digital platform, and all of a sudden it stares you in the eye, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is interesting. And what if? And you take a chance, and all of a sudden now you're in a whole new world of exploration.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I love about going into used bookstores. And that happened to me just this summer. I was in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and it was a used bookstore. So I went in with zero interest in buying anything, and of course I walked out on a book that interviewed the last of the men that walked on the moon.
Oh,
Um, and I got it
Oh,
for
that's
like a
cool.
pound. I was like, "This is
yeah,
great," and it turned out to be a
yeah,
wonderful book.
right, right.
Yeah.
That is cool.
Uh,
I wanted to turn the corner a little bit towards you, Patrick, and hopefully we'll get the chance to do another just interview where we talk a lot more about your works. As I had mentioned previous before the interview started, I started reading one of your books. Do you mind? Maybe I should have asked this earlier. Patrick or Pat? Which one do you prefer? Does it matter?
I prefer Patrick, and the reason Gary calls me Pat is because that's what I was known as
Yeah,
when I was at the bookstore. And then I moved to Northern Ireland, and I never liked the name Pat. And my girlfriend at the time said, "Well, you just moved here, so just tell everyone your name is Patrick." So I've been Patrick ever since like
there we go.
1994. So it's
Look at
like,
that.
and my college friends also call me Pat. So it's like this demarcator. So
Yeah,
Patrick, if you don't mind.
I've got Patrick on my mind,
they're
anyways.
not too different though.
No.
No, no, no.
Pat and Patrick.
It kind of works, yeah. So this is the first book of yours that I picked up, and if I can, there we go. In the Shadow of the Dota. Is that pronouncing that right? Dota
Dora.
or Dora?
Dora.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Dora. And the Shadow of Dora. My gosh, like I need a
I'm going to be right
glasses.
back, so just
Yeah,
keep.
do your thing.
Yeah.
Um, so a harrowing journey of survival. So I started this, and there we go. And first of all, it's dealing with World War II time period and concentration camp that I've never heard anyone talk about this story at all. And it's
Yeah.
almost out of nowhere. You're presenting, a part of history that has been just unexplored. I mean, tell me a little bit about the journey of writing this book.
Yeah, I was drawn to it's called In the Shadow of Dora because it's about the concentration camp Dora Mittelbau. And it sounds like I'm making this up, but it's all based in historical fact. Dora Mittelbau was a secret underground concentration camp where they built the world's first rockets, the V2 rocket. Um, and so my first novel was The Commandant of Lubezec, which takes place in a death camp. And you can imagine that was very hard to write. Oh, thank you. You've got it right there. And it did well. It kept me busy. I was on tour with it for quite a while, and I thought, for my next book, I need to write about something that's not quite as dark. And I thought, well, I've been a nut for the space program, especially Apollo. So I started with thinking maybe I could write about that. And then I remembered this concentration camp of Dora Mittelbau and the Nazi scientists that ran that camp and had slave labor build the V2 rocket. When the war was over, they fled to the Americans. Werner von Braun would be the most famous, and he was in charge of the V2 program. And they surrendered to the Americans. And rather than prosecute them for crimes against humanity, which we should have done, we made a Faustian bargain and we said, "You come to America and build us the best rockets and the best jets in the world." And they did. And we got to the moon before the end of the decade of the 60s because of these Nazi scientists. I mean,
Mhm.
it's very hard for me to imagine that the Saturn V rocket, which you need something that huge to propel the tonnage up into the stratosphere or the firmament in order to get to the moon. So I'm very confident in saying we wouldn't have gotten to the moon if it wasn't for these Nazi scientists who ran Dora Mittelbau. And it seemed like it would be a story that I think would capture the imaginations of people.
Well, what's interesting is, as I'm sure you know, there's been a resurgence of interest in World War II storytelling. So, Kristen Hanna's, I think, The Nightingale was pretty popular, and Jodi Picoult's, I think it's The Pact, and whatever, Tattooist of Auschwitz. I mean, there's always these stories that are coming out that are, kind of coupled with a little bit of, romance. But I'll tell you, when I started reading this book, what I felt was, you can feel it. You can feel being there. I mean, honestly, That was one of the things when I was younger. I read The Hiding Place by Corey Ten Boom, and
Mm.
there's this kind of sobering brutality. And actually, because of your book, I wrote down this idea, and I'm going to throw this out and just tell me if I'm on the right track. But I said we do a disservice to good by minimizing evil. And the more authentic darkness is exposed, the more profound the light. I think this is why the Holocaust is so important and so often told. The horror is so brutal, but the stories of hope amidst this hell are profound witnesses of light over darkness, life over death, and hope amidst despair. And I felt
Yeah.
like that was one of the gifts that you gave in this book, and I'm sure it's going to be the case for the Commandant of Liebezek.
If I had a chance to retitle that book, I would, because no one knows how to pronounce the that last word. It's Liebezek, but I should have just called it the Commandant and left it at that.
Yeah.
But the truth is that you don't shy away from the horrific and the brutality, and it's hard to read, but it's also I think it's a service to what really happened. Is that in your mind when you're writing? Like, I don't want to shy away from this, even if it's hard to write.
Yes, and I'm really grateful that you had that sort of effect because I've heard from a number of readers of all three of my Holocaust novels. They feel like the Holocaust is in the present tense and it's in
Hmm.
color, and they can smell it and hear it, and that's very intentional on my part. I want to bring it to life as much as I can, which means that I have to do an extraordinary amount of historical research. Which involves obviously not just reading memoirs and history books, but interviewing survivors and going to the camps themselves. So I got into Dora Mittelbau, the tunnels of Dora Mittelbau, on two different occasions, and it
Hmm.
was pretty sobering to be in that tunnel. The Soviets blocked it up and dynamited the entrance, so it's just rubble, but you can still see all these rocket parts in the tunnels, and the water table has risen in the
Hmm.
tunnel of Dora Mittelbau, and the water is very clear. I mean, I stood in a part of the tunnel, and I could look down through the water, and there were still desks and file cabinets that were submerged. It was cold and eerie, and it was hard to imagine what the place looked like while it was functioning.
Yeah. I have to say, when my wife and I went to Dachau, again, I'm pretty terrible with pronunciations here, Dachau. You look at this place and it's so clean. It just
Yeah,
doesn't seem like it's this place of horror. And some of these documentaries from that time period you're watching, and some people just seem like there was nothing going on there. Some of that was probably intentional, keeping their head down. But I think that's one of even the greater. Well, didn't you say that, I think, in the beginning of this book here, about like this idea of drinking water? They're drinking water in front of these prisoners, but it's because they know they'll never be able to actually get that, cup of water. It's just to torture them further.
yeah, yeah. The psychological torture,
Yeah.
and the cultural. Um, I mean, a place like Auschwitz, for example. I mean, if you are a devout Jew, you're not supposed to get a tattoo, not supposed to cut your forelocks. The body is supposed to be buried quickly. Think of the crucifixion of Jesus, for example.
Hmm.
Cremation is definitely, you shouldn't be cremated. I mean, it's like right down the line. I mean, it's not just it's the cultural genocide that's also happened at a place like Auschwitz.
That's right. Yeah, that's a
Mhm.
good way to say that. Well,
And would you
go ahead,
say,
Gary.
Pat, that the German, I don't know how you would say it, but the Germans were so systematic and so they kept such good records and they were so organized and they just used that kind of national characteristic in the extermination of the Jews, just like they did making railroads or the Autobahn or something like that. Would you say that that's a characteristic that,
Yeah, that efficiency.
yeah, the
Yeah,
efficiency, that's right.
yeah, yeah, and I think there's this popular idea amongst a lot of people that the Nazis had a very clear idea of what they wanted to do, going back to like 1933, 1934. But the Holocaust kind of zigged and zagged, and they were trying to, how do I word this without? they're trying to figure it out, the most efficient
Yep.
way. And it wasn't until really we see the development of Auschwitz that's really um, going very strong. And that's the same with the Operation Reinhardt camps of Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec. They're very operationally very, very efficient. It's serial mass murder, every
Right.
day,
Yeah.
sometimes twice a
Right.
day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But amidst all of this writing about such a difficult scenario, you're also putting out works of poetry and exploring, the good and the beautiful and the true and all that stuff. I mean, talk just a little bit about your poetry. And let me just see, I have one other book of yours. Maybe this is Across the Lake. I think this is your other book on the Holocaust, though,
Yeah,
right?
that's my most recent novel, Across the Lake. It takes place in the only all-female concentration camp, a
Oh,
place
yeah.
called
Oh,
Ravensbrück. And it's an exploration of gender and violence because the female guards were every bit as brutal in Ravensbrück, arguably maybe even worse
Hmm.
than their male counterparts in places like Auschwitz and Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, Mauthausen. Yeah.
So I
mhm.
don't have I don't have yet. I'll get in my hands on them. Your some of your poetry books, but has this been something that you've obviously you're passionate about, but are you still writing more poetry, or do you think you're writing more in the novel format? What's is it just a different itch that's being scratched?
Yeah, I've moved over to prose. I haven't written a poem for many years now. It's just a question of I always felt like I was a prose writer, fiction in
Hmm.
particular, and I use poetry as a way to sort of really hone my craft and learn how to tell a story in a very compressed form, but in a
Hmm.
sort of a beautiful lyric way. Some people have said that they can tell that a poet has written my
Well,
novels. Um, but I appreciate the comment you made a couple of minutes ago because when I was writing my first novel, The Commandant of Lubezec, I was also at the same time writing a poetry collection called Adoptable because my son is adopted. And I didn't realize it at the time, but there's all this darkness, and I kind of needed to be writing this book
hmm,
simultaneously, which is about light and hope and the
hmm.
future. And they came out, I think they came out in the same year as I recall.
Hmm. Yeah, that's powerful, actually. That's beautiful.
Now you're working on or you just submitted another book, didn't you, Pat? I
I
mean, I
did.
don't know how you do it. I've been working on I've been working on the same book for like 3 years, and I don't even know if I'll ever get it done. But you just submitted another book, right?
I
About
did.
Minnesota.
I did. Yeah, the University of Indiana Press approached me about writing a book of creative nonfiction about my home state of Minnesota,
Oh,
and that's a whole story in its own right. But ultimately, I said yes, and it's called Greater Minnesota. It'll be out fall of 2025, and it's part history and part travel log.
Nice.
Um, and if you're familiar with the travel writing of Bill Bryson,
Oh, yeah.
yep,
he was my guiding star, and it was just such a breath of fresh air. It was just such a joy to be able to write with humor and curiosity
Yeah.
and to explore my home state and visit places I'd heard of my whole life but had never gone to, like Hibbing. I'd never been to Hibbing. I'd never been
right.
to Bemidji, never been to Grand Portage.
Yeah.
So it was just a joy to write this book.
Oh man. Well, I'm looking forward to that. I think
Thank you.
that'll be
My
great.
early readers have said that it's really funny at times, and they learned a lot about
Well,
Minnesota.
good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Now, did you get a chance to interact then with Bill Bryson? Was he, I don't know, available to you, or just you were well versed in his books and thought, I like that comedic,
Yeah.
portion?
We all have our all stars, and Bill Bryson is one of them. Every time a book comes out, I buy it, read it, devour it. I'd love to meet the guy. I
Yeah.
would love to go to a reading. But I have a small group of writers I feel that way about. Like the book's coming out, and I buy it just sight unseen. So,
Well, yeah. Tell me, give me a couple of those. Who are those authors for you? Bill Bryson.
Tim O'Brien,
Okay.
no question. I
Didn't he
read the
give a
things they
blurb in your
carried.
book?
What's that?
Didn't he do a blurb in your book?
He did. He did.
Yes,
And
that's pretty awesome.
the first time I met Tim, it was for me, it was a bit like meeting the Beatles because he was just such a huge influence on me. And we're friends, friendly anyway. I can email him and things like that. So Tim, for sure, and his latest book, America Fantastica, is just brilliant. I it's hilarious and dark, and it's very different from anything he's ever
Mm,
written before. Pat Barker, she's a British novelist. Regeneration trilogy is what she's best known for.
mm. That's
Um,
cool.
Kazuya Ishiguro is another one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
The when I don't know how it happened, I stumbled on The Lost Continent by Bill Bryson, and that first paragraph, I started laughing so hard because it was the whole idea of getting out of that small town, because inevitably somebody's gonna get stuck there and working at a Firestone tire place, and and then he just concludes with, but then they end up staying there and working at the Firestone. I mean, it was just I thought like I know where I'm at with this guy's writing. It was pretty
yeah.
fun. It's kind of how I felt with Gary. I thought, like, I know where I'm at. I know exactly where I'm at when I'm reading this book. Like, um, this is the thing too. I think both of you are writing in a way, how do I say this? But you both know the book world so well, and you also know as readers what works. And then you gave that to the audience. I just kind of feel like here's a book from a reader, a lover of literature, to you. And I think you're both, coming at this from very unique positions, and it's such a gift. And Gary, you told me your second book here that you're taking your time putting and crafting together. That it's
That's
not
a
on the book.
that's a kind way of putting it, I'd say. But
It's not necessarily in the book world. So do you want
right.
to tease that out at all, or are you just gonna
Well,
let us
no,
wait?
yeah, it's Pat's seen a few chapters of it and in sort of a kind of a rough form, but it's a story about I'm half Icelandic, and the I have a cousin who has traced our ancestry back to the Vikings when the Norwegian Vikings first settled Iceland,
Hmm.
and to a specific Viking named Egil Skallagrimsson. And he was the subject of one of the sagas, Egil's saga. And so that's kind of the one basis of the story. And then the other one is that so after the Vikings settled in Iceland, uh, it wasn't long before they used up all the wood on the island, building long houses and long ships, and basically became trapped on the island
Hmm.
for they could no longer go out raiding and pillaging and all that kind of thing. And so my ancestors and Egil's ancestors were uh, basically stuck there for about 1,000 years. And it wasn't until the 1870s when my great great grandparents Helgi and Helga uh, uh, left Iceland after there was a famine. There was a famine in Iceland because there was a smallpox epidemic and volcanoes and that kind of thing. And so they left Iceland and came to first Michigan and then settled in the Dakota Territory.
Hmm.
And so the story goes from the Viking Age to the the settlement on the North Dakota plains, and then interspersed with that is the story, the Egil Saga story. So there are a lot
Hmm.
of
That's cool.
Pat would probably uh, advise his students not to write this book because it would be too complicated. But it's really complicated in that I talk about the Native American tribe
Oh,
that's
that's
sort of
great. Yeah.
around that area,
Yeah.
and
You could
uh,
call it Ufta.
yeah, right, right,
That's more Norwegian, but
yeah. So anyway, we'll see how it
I'm
goes.
excited. Yeah, that's good. Let me just okay, so I have to ask a couple of fast questions here. First of all, right now in the book talk and booktube communities, there's a lot of love for Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. It's kind of making a big resurgence. A lot of people
Mhm.
talking about it. And you talk a little bit about the his Booktown, or his attempt at a Booktown out in the middle of
Yeah,
nowhere. And
yeah.
in some ways, there's this question of uh, first of all, I wanted to find out, did you actually get the chance to meet him and speak with him? I mean, I know that
Oh
you
yeah,
visited.
I met with I knew Larry quite not really well, but I met him several times. He would come to our store in Stillwater,
Hmm.
and I would when I would go there, I'd meet him, and so I knew him relatively well. Yeah,
And you were the one that initiated the idea, let's make Stillwater a book town. Like, no,
yeah,
from what I gather, it was you that kind of pushed that forward.
that's exactly right. It was my idea, and anyone who says otherwise is a lie.
That's right. Let the record
It was
stand.
truly my idea.
And then that happened. And I don't know at what point um, does that get revoked, or does it just stay forever? Would you still kind of consider
Well,
Stillwater Booktown?
technically, I, I mean, it would be in perpetuity, sure.
Good.
If once a book town, always a book town.
Let's say
Although
that.
you have to have I think you have to have a certain number of books and booksellers to really be a legitimate book town.
Yeah. The
But
numbers were staggering from what
yeah,
you were given. I mean, that was incredible. The amount of books within just a couple square block or couple blocks. It was ridiculous.
yeah. Well, it was wild. I don't know how much Pat remembers about that, but uh, the publicity we got
Yeah.
for that whole thing was just crazy. We got articles in the papers and interviews, and even the New York Times and um, other places would talk about the book town, and so it was a great marketing ploy,
Yeah.
if nothing else.
Okay, I got to ask one last big question, and then we can just kind of wrap things up soon. But you mentioned one of my all-time favorite series and writers, John Dunning, and his
Yep.
Cliff Janeway series.
Yep.
Now, because I get a little crazy, but I have all of his stuff, and I think I have one of his that's signed at least. And
Uh-huh.
I'm wearing Ken Sanders Booksellers. I was out there visiting, and
In Salt
uh,
Lake City?
yeah.
Yeah, Salt Lake City.
He
Yeah.
moved. He kind of moves around a little bit, but I think he's in his new place now, and um, so we
He's
talked a little
getting
bit
on in
about.
years. He's
Yeah,
getting
yeah,
on
he
in
is.
years
Yeah, he
too.
is. There was a
Yeah.
couple things though that I was able to kind of ask him about, and one was a guy named Kent Harriff who wrote a book called Plain Song and Benediction, and oh my gosh, he's one of my all-time favorite authors. But then we started talking a little bit about John Dunning, and I
Mhm.
said, from what I understood, he'd had some type of a stroke or physical impairment that prevented him from writing anymore. I think he's still
Mhm.
alive, but boy, I miss that Cliff Janeway series. Those 4 to 5 books are perfection. And I really have struggled to find something that is like that. Kind of that, it's almost like your book, Gary, but with a sleuth involved. We're in the
Yeah.
world
Yeah.
of books, and we're dealing with the criminal under pinnings of certain things, but we're still talking about books. And
Yeah.
um,
Well, I knew John too. He had a bookstore in Denver, and he would come to the Twin Cities and to book sales. And I remember waiting in line with him to buy books at a like a library book sale. So he was still pounding the pavement even then. So
I mean, do you know? Ken was thinking it wasn't a stroke necessarily, but he's probably done writing from what
I
I would
would I
say.
would suspect so.
Oh,
I think once you
yeah,
get to be our age, it's it gets harder and harder. That's for sure. I would
sure.
think so. Yeah.
What do you think's just in terms of scratching that itch? What if someone came into your store back in the day and they said, "I love me some Cliff Janeway," what else do you got?
Um, I'm trying to think if there was anyone else
I
that would
know.
be that. I mean, there's that Seventh Gate. Is that the name of the book? I can't remember who that's by, but they made
Uh,
that into a movie about. And then there's, there were there were several books about, like Helene Hans wrote a
oh,
couple of books,
that's right. Yeah, I've read her books too.
about
Yeah.
that. But I don't know. But that my problem is I don't read much fiction at all, so I'm really not in,
Oh,
not
yeah, yeah, that
not up
makes
on
sense.
that kind of thing.
Well, that was my little selfish aside there. I have to be honest, you know.
Sure,
So,
sure. I'm
um,
sure there are others.
oh yeah,
Uh, there are. I'm sure there are others because
oh my gosh,
it's a
yeah,
popular subject, that's for sure. And there's a lot of mysteries associated with bookstores and
yeah,
booksellers.
yeah. I'm riding a fine line on what I'm liking and what drives me crazy. We'll just leave it at that. So,
Well, most people who write that kind of thing don't really know what they're talking about.
yeah,
You'll see a lot of sort of romantic
right,
novels, and
yeah,
they really haven't lived they haven't lived the hard life
yeah,
to of the bookseller. It's mostly romantic. It's very romanticized, the business,
yeah.
as Pat knows.
Well, I
That
will say that
Yeah,
you are
it's hard work.
sobering.
Yeah,
what's
once
that?
you hired me, I wasn't expecting to be building bookshelves
Yeah,
and painting floors
it's it
and
it's it's
the amount
very
of books that needed to
romanticized.
be moved.
And I got a lot of you know some of the feedback I got was that, well, you're just you know you don't like books. You're just a businessman, and you're just trying to make a living, and you don't have any feeling for books. But anybody that's halfway successful in the book business has to make a living at it. Otherwise, you know
You're
it's not
collecting.
possible.
Yeah.
What's
O-
that?
Otherwise, you're collecting.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's, I think, my great struggle is if I'm selling a book, that means it's not in my collection.
right. Yeah.
So that is the challenge. So, um, yeah, I was gonna say, I think your book, Gary, really offers a sobering, like real, like presentation of what it's like. I mean, it's not the romantic, kind of ridiculousness. Like here it is, boots on the ground. This is what it's like.
Yeah.
And but it's funny because there is a place for that. Sean, I don't know if it's Bithell or Bythell there in Scotland with his the bookshop. He's
Yeah.
written those memoirs, and people love them. I mean, there's
Right.
there's
Yeah.
there's a day in the life, and he says I'm repeating things because it's a regular rhythm here. This is what we're doing, and he fits the stereotypical grumpy bookseller. But at the end of the day, people do want to hear what it's like beyond just the romantic, kind of,
The
uh,
cat and the cast iron stove
right,
kind of thing. Right.
right, right. Yeah. I won't keep this going too long. I'm going to wrap things up, but I want to say first of all, it's been for me, I feel spoiled rotten to just sit and shoot the bull a few minutes about the thing I love outside of my family and, faith. I mean, the books, that's kind of it. That's what I do. And tomorrow, I was telling Patrick that tomorrow I'm going to pick up about 1,500 books, I think.
Oh,
So there's this little old timer. He's got a book in a bookstore in a barn
yeah.
called Berry Hill Books up
Oh,
here
yeah.
in central New York. He's still at it. His family started that business in like 1968, 72, something like that in that arena. He's still
Okay.
there. And
Okay.
he does once a year, he does these, people can come up and he sells off sections of his bookstore.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
so, like Civil War, you can buy all the Civil War, let's say for whatever, $200 or $100, something
Stay
ridiculous.
away from the cat book section, right?
Right, exactly. So I said to him, I said, well, like, well, what are you going to do? I'm taking this whole section. And he goes, that's okay. It doesn't matter. He goes, we have regular clientele that come in all the time, and that means they'll be just be fresh stock because we'll get it. And I said to him, but aren't you like worried like about you won't have? He goes, we'll see it again. It's really rare that a book comes in that we won't ever see again. I'll see him again. I'm thinking to
Mhm.
myself, you are so detached from this. You are the perfect bookseller, because for me, I literally be. I mean, there'd be a part of me be like, I'm not sure you really want that because it looks better in my hands than it does in
Yeah.
yours.
Yeah.
Was it hard for you ever, end with this, to get rid of a book that you have in your mind that you kind of wish to this day that you would have kept?
Oh, there's plenty of them, and I have a collection of books myself. But when you have six kids, like I say in the book, uh, your motivation is a little different than if you've got a lot of money in the bank and you have a choice in that
Yeah.
regard. So.
Patrick, is there anything that you remember from that day of working there in the store and a book comes in and you're like, this is crazy, and you were super pumped about it?
Oh yeah, and believe me, there were several days where I think I owed Gary money because I'd see the books and I'd buy the books, and the money I made that day I actually owed Gary money
That's
because I
funny.
was buying books. But there were two books that I won't forget, and Gary, you might remember this one. It was in your World War II section, and it was the 1936 Olympics, black leather
Oh,
cover,
yep,
and it was
I
in
do remember
German.
that.
And I remember it was $100, and it's like I can't afford $100, but I'm really going to regret it. And I finally thought to myself, "All right, buy it." And I went to work that day, and it was gone.
Oh
Oh
no.
Yeah,
no.
someone had bought it.
Oh, I
Um,
remember that. I remember
yeah,
that book.
that
Sure.
was it was I've never seen anything like that before. And then
Yeah.
the other book that I remember very clearly, and I honestly we were at a book fair. I was helping you at a book fair, and it was at the
Yep.
Minnesota State Fairgrounds. And I don't know
Yep.
if you had this book or if someone else had this book. But it was a signed first edition of James Joyce's Ulysses.
Oh
And I
my.
got to hold it and to touch
Yeah. I
Joyce's
never
signature. And Joyce is a huge influence on me. So
never had
that
that.
I think the selling price was like $40,000.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would have been. Yeah. No, I never had that book. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
It must have been another, and he was kind enough to let me, touch Joyce's signature. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's
Well,
actually really cool.
I talk about that in my book about how Rosenbach bought the original manuscript of Ulysses at auction.
Oh God. Wow.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I think it was Ulysses, maybe it was something else, but
No, I think
and
I
then
think that's
Joyce
one.
wrote a poem about it. That he wrote a poem about uh, Rosenbach buying this manuscript and he bought it for like
wow.
That's
$1,900 or something.
crazy.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. You mentioned something earlier. I just want to ask for your opinion on this. You said you would go to these library sales, right? And you'd get some of your books from there. I
Mhm.
don't. What do you do with the the card holder in the back that's glued on, and sometimes they're gluing and taping the dust jacket to the to the boards, and it's almost sometimes I feel like a place that supposedly loves books has done everything possible to destroy a book. It just
Yeah.
is
No,
unreal.
yeah.
What I mean, how do
Well,
you
you just
resell
have to,
those?
you have to do what you can. You can get some of that stuff off, and
Yeah.
you can get glue off with acetone, or you can uh, maybe excise it with a sharp knife or something. But really, there's not much you can do ultimately to get rid of that stuff, and it impacts the value of the book something.
Yeah.
thing.
So you probably had a team of people that you would get these books in. They had to get them ready for the shelves. And then does it
Well,
go through your eyes and you just priced it up? Is that how it
normally
works?
I would never buy an ex-library book. I
Ah,
Yeah, I never.
yeah,
I would bet that I would never buy ex-library books and books in bad condition and things like that. I really, as Patrick can attest, the quality was superb at St. Croix Antiquary. No, I
Yeah,
really
especially
I wouldn't buy ex-libraries most of the time.
yeah,
especially that rare book room that you had. Uh, that
yeah.
was just a room of delights going in there.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, we would, I would travel. I had all those kids, and I would travel 10 days a month. I'd go to England and Canada and all over the country. So I we really had books that at St. Croix that um, most people in the area didn't have.
Right.
We had a really a different kind of stock than most other people did.
Well, I'm telling you, I've loved your book. I love because I've been to Stillwater. I've been in your store. I wish I would have known that I was going to interview you decades later, but it's quite possible I bought something
Hindsight
there.
is 2020.
Right. And Patrick, I feel a little bit spoiled that I'm getting introduced to your work. I hadn't known about it before, so I'm super
Thank you.
excited about a new author in my life. I'm gonna wrap things up, and I just want you to know how much I loved this, and I'm hoping that the viewers will spoil themselves and get a hold of your books. The Last Bookseller is available. It's everywhere, and I suggest if you can find a used bookstore, ask them to snag that, get that in, support them. Um, I'm listening to the audio version. By the way, I wish Gary, it was you reading your book on that audio version. That's all I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I
say.
wasn't. I mean, I guess I wasn't that happy with the guy. He's a little bit over
I,
dramatic,
I'm not
but
as happy with that guy. I mean, I'm thinking you're a lot more of a good sell for that. But it's still cool. The
yeah.
digital format, which of course I think I bought it every format you can buy this book, Gary. You're welcome. I'm gonna help pay your rent here. But
I don't know about that. Maybe a cup of coffee, right?
right, maybe a cup of coffee. But the the digital format has some color photos, but what I loved is that you can, when you go through this book, you also introduce the reader to the early beginnings and the store and some of the people you're talking about. So I love that it's not just a trip down memory lane, but it's also kind of a cool little archived place. And then Patrick, of course, I have three of your, but we have about six books out, seven books out, maybe more, with
Thank you.
one coming soon. Let's go. I'm gonna get the others. We're gonna try to promote this, but I'm spoiled. Thank you guys. Is there anything I didn't ask that you just kind of would love to say, or maybe places that people can find you at, your websites? Patrick, let's start with you, and then Gary, we can end with you.
Sure. Yeah, my website is patrickhicks.org. That's all one word, patrickhicks.org. And you'll find tons of information there. The bio, books, reviews, videos. I've even created a soundtrack to one of my novels, In the Shadow of Dora, because there's music that appears in the novel, so you can listen to the various songs.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and my website is www.thelastbookseller.com. And there's a video of the like when I closed the store and all that kind of thing in Stillwater and where you can buy the book and some of the reviews.
Yeah,
So
good. I mean, it's awesome. I can't recommend it enough. And Patrick, again, I'm loving your book. So we'll wrap things up. Thanks you guys so much for watching. Thank you, gentlemen, for kind of spoiling me with your words of wisdom and presence. And hopefully we'll get the chance to dive a little bit more deeper, especially into your works, Patrick. And then Gary, if I think of a whole bunch of other questions, I might bother you again for another interview. So